Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I think it's a very important time for this area with the Wilfer project apparently, if not dead, on its deathbed, but the Trasvineth proposal for a small modular reactor apparently coming forward. I think it's a very important time for the region, and what I want to talk about today is small modular reactors and give you some information about the proposals for Trasvineth and what you need to be asking about for Trasvineth. You've probably all heard about small modular reactors, these pocket nuclear plants that are going to be delivered on the back of a low loader. They'll run for 20 years with nobody touching them, and then you'll put them back on a low loader and away they'll go as if it had never been there. It's not quite that way, but that's some of the sort of talk that there is about small modular reactors. So what I want to talk about today, first thing I want to talk about is small modular reactors. What are they and what is the selling point for them? Why are they seen as such a good idea? Then I want to look at the UK's SMR policy over the past 5 or 6 years that the UK has been talking about developing SMRs. Then a brief word about the Trasvineth site. Then I want to talk about the two designs that I think are probably the front runners if there is going to be SMR development in the UK, the Rolls-Royce design and an American design from a company called NewScale. And then finally some brief words about what the critique of SMRs is, what is wrong with the idea that they are such a good thing. Probably all a bit dense to read, especially from the back, but let's start off with what are they? The International Atomic Energy Agency says small modular reactors are defined as advanced reactors that produce electricity up to 300 megawatts per module. These reactors have advanced design features, deployable either as a single or multi-module plant, and designed to be built in factories and shipped to utilities for installation as demand arises. So small, less than 300 megawatts, built largely in factories, taken to the site and just basically bolted together there. That's the rationale for them. There are these two meanings of modular, and depending on the manufacturer, they talk up one aspect of it or the other. Are they modular in the sense that they're designed to be built in clusters of 5 or 6 or 7 or even more? Or are they modular in the sense that they're built as modules in a factory, taken to the site and then bolted together? Two different sorts of meaning. There are several uses for small modular reactors worldwide. In some cases they're promoted as reactors for relatively small grids that are not big enough to accommodate a reactor like the one proposed for Wilfer. In the Middle East they're talked about as a way of generating electricity to desalinate water. The Gulf states need to desalinate water, and they believe that nuclear power would be a good way to do it. Or they are talked about as a way of producing process heat, and if you get heat at a high enough level, high temperature reactors can produce, planned for 1000 C, you can make hydrogen very much more efficiently than the traditional way of electrolytically splitting up water into hydrogen and oxygen. So lots of different uses for them. There's basically, whereas there's one name, there is a huge range of technologies talked about, but we can, for these purposes, we can divide them into two different categories. The first type are what are called light water reactors, and these are basically scaled down versions of the reactors that dominate the world's stock of reactors. So light water reactors is the term that covers pressurized water reactors, the type that's planned for Hinkley, or boiling water reactors, the type that was planned for Wilfer. And there are about 430 reactors worldwide, and 370 of those are either PWRs or BWRs. So this type of reactor, we know it works. Whether it works reliably, whether it works economically is another matter, but if we build them, there's a pretty good chance it will produce electricity. And the expectation from the industry is that these light water reactor versions of small modular reactors will be deployable by 2030. So they are well advanced, and by 2030 we can start ordering them. Rolls-Royce says 2028. The other type are non-light water advanced reactor types, and there's about 5 or 6 different varieties of these, and again they fall into 2 types. There's the types that we've built and have failed. So there's the fast reactors like the one at Dounreay. You probably know about the fast breeder reactor on the north coast of Scotland. There are about half a dozen of these built worldwide, and generally they've failed very badly. For example, France built the Super Phoenix reactor, 1,200 megawatts. It lasted for 3 years and produced barely any electricity before it was abandoned. Then there are the high temperature reactors. Again, people have talked about these for 50 or 60 years. Again, about half a dozen have been built worldwide, all failed badly. One was built in Germany, it lasted 2 years, produced almost no electricity. One was built in America, lasted 10 years, and its availability was about 20%. So bad failures. The other ones are concepts that have been around for 50 or 60 years, but have never even been built to prototype scale. So these are very much in the science fiction realm of things. They require major materials advances if they are to be buildable. So you've got these basically 2 types. The light water reactor ones, which we know we can build, but we don't know if they'll be economical, we don't know if they'll be reliable. And the non-LWR ones, which are the ones we don't even know if we can build them, much less whether they will be economical. So what was the rationale? Why did we come to these small modular reactors? Well, large reactors had become very expensive and were getting more and more expensive. And just to give you an example, when the UK government published its white paper on nuclear power in 2008, it said that the cost of the 2 reactors at Hinkley would be £4 billion. The latest estimate is £20 billion, and we've barely started to build yet. So they are going up at a huge rate of knots. They're nearly always late. If you can find me a nuclear project under construction around the world that isn't late, then you're doing very well. They're nearly always over budget. And that means that they are almost impossible. They are very difficult to finance. Bankers are not pro or anti-nuclear. They are anti-taking risks with their money. So they will lend money only if their money is not at risk. And that means that either taxpayers or electricity consumers are taking the risk. So taxpayers, if the government guarantees the funds for the nuclear reactor, then if things go wrong, taxpayers will pay the bank back. And for example, for the Wilfer project, the government had promised to lend all the money that was required. So it would actually have been the British government lending the money, as well as taking a third equity stake. Hinkley, consumers guaranteed to buy all the output at a high price for 35 years. The Hinkley price is about 2.5 times the current wholesale price and nearly double the latest prices for offshore wind. So it's very expensive power. The assumption was that the high costs and the inevitable cost overruns and time overruns were because reactors were being built in small numbers. They were being built as one-offs, and they were being built on site, and on-site work is notoriously difficult to manage. It's much easier supposedly to manage a factory than it is to manage a huge construction site with 101 different contractors around the place. They claimed that production line manufacture. So if you had built a production line and you made half a dozen of these per year, you could make them much more cheaply than if you were making them on a one-off basis. And these savings from these production line methods would more than pay for the losses from scale economies, because you know that if you make something bigger, it tends to be cheaper. You know, if you build a reactor vessel that's twice the volume of another one, it won't cost twice as much, at least in theory. Building in factories would minimize the risk of cost and time overruns, because you could manage things much better than trying to manage a site with 101 people moving around on it. The UK government started to talk about SMRs in about 2012, and in 2014 it commissioned a feasibility study for SMRs. It talked about reactors less than 300 megawatts as per the IAEA. And this feasibility study found a UK market of 7 to 21 gigawatts. 7 gigawatts is about 2.5 times the size of the Wilford B project. 21 gigawatts would be about 7 of them. And a world market of about 65 to 85 gigawatts by 2035. It's a very optimistic forecast, and most forecasts of the world market by 2025 35 is less than 65 to 85 gigawatts. So they're saying all the world market would go to SMRs, and more than most people think there will be in total. So the feasibility study said that the first SMRs would be competitive with Hinkley. The first SMRs would cost no more than Hinkley, but as these production line methods came into operation, the costs would come down much more steeply than the costs would come down for the large reactors such as Hinkley. Then in November 2015, when this feasibility study came out, the government announced that it would spend £250 million by 2020 on SMRs. Then in March 2016, it fleshed out this announcement a bit more. It launched a competition to find the best design of SMR to be built in the UK, and it promised an SMR delivery roadmap would be published by the end of 2016. Deadlines were missed again and again, and by December 2017 the SMR competition was quietly abandoned, and the roadmap has never been published. Most of that 250 million was never spent, so things were going wrong. Next one, please. In 2017, quite late in the game, the Rolls-Royce announced their design, 450 megawatts, so not a small modular reactor, 50% larger than the normal definition of an SMR. They claimed that the first reactor would produce at about 7 pence a kilowatt hour and would come down to about 6 pence a kilowatt hour, compared to about the 10 pence we're going to pay for Hinkley Point C. In June of last year, the government announced at the Trasvanna site the nuclear sector deal, big trumpets and big announcements, offering £200 million for this new nuclear sector deal. What it didn't have was any end date to it. So whereas the previous announcement of 250 million said it would be spent by 2020, there is no end date for this. The biggest lump of that 200 million, 86 million, is for fusion, which of course has nothing whatsoever to do with the type of power station we're talking about. It's another science fiction technology, harnessing the power of the sun, you know, this Cullum reactor nonsense. 56 million was for the non-LWR SMRs, so 56 million was for the ones that will probably never be buildable. There was nothing specific at all for the light water reactors like Rolls-Royce or like the NuScale one. So it appears there has been a complete change in policy, but the government of course never acknowledged that, and I'm just guessing from this announcement what is behind this, because it does seem an extraordinary U-turn from committing 250 million by 2020 to withdrawing those funds completely. It does appear that UK policy is in some disarray and they have no clue what they're doing with it. Next one, please. Nothing unusual, yeah, exactly. You probably know all this about Trasvaneth, but it was the site of a Magnox station which ran from 1965 to 1991, and the announcement of the nuclear sector deal at Trasvaneth was widely seen as a signal that the first SMRs would be built at that station. The Magnox station comprised 2 reactors which were each designed to produce 250 megawatts, but they were never really able to operate at their full power, and they were derated down to 195 soon after they were commissioned. They were relatively reliable, load factor of 80%, and they were probably about the best of the Magnoxes, although they were almost the first to be closed down. The fuel, which was the vast majority of radioactivity, was removed very quickly after the reactor closed down. That always makes economic sense, because until the fuel is removed from the reactor, you have to staff the reactor as if it was an operating reactor. So get the fuel out as quick as you can, then you can sack all the workers. The uncontaminated buildings are being removed, and the remaining plant expected to be sealed by 2029. So what's not contaminated, the turbine generators, the canteen, all that is being removed at the moment, and by 2029 the site will be sealed and made secure for the next 45 years, until the radioactive vessel is cut up and disposed of. And that's a difficult task. Most of the radioactivity is in the fuel, but the reactor vessel itself is not something you would ever want to go near, and the likelihood is that when you come to cut it up, you'll need robots to do it, because it's too hot for people to go near. That's planned for 2074 to 2083, which of course is never in political terms. It's about the third of the Magnoxes. The first one starts in 2070. The last one will be Wilfer, which is expected to be started in 2097. These are expensive tasks, decommissioning, about 2 billion quid per Magnox station. Next one, please. So let's come on to the 2 designs that I think are the front runners for deployment in Britain if we are going to go ahead with any SMRs. And the first, just because it's Rolls-Royce, and Rolls-Royce is the only British consortium offering an SMR that's credible. It was announced in 2017, as I said, much later than all the others. 10 years, 20 years later than NuScale, 10 years later than most of the others. So it's a very early stage of design, despite what Rolls-Royce says to you about it being developed and them knowing all the costs. They don't. They haven't built it yet. It appears to be very old style, 450 megawatt PWR, so it's not got the advanced features that most of the SMRs that we're talking about, or even Wilfer or Hinkley, have got. It's very old school. Rolls-Royce talks about factory-made clusters, and it's insistent that everything can be delivered on the back of a truck, but they don't talk about modules of clusters of reactors on the same site. So it does appear to be very much a one-off. So, given the size of the Trasvaneth site, I would be surprised if it could accommodate more than one Rolls-Royce SMR. There's no interest in this design outside the UK. Soon after it was announced, Jordan said it might build one, but a year later it said, no, we're not going to build that, we're going to go over to NuScale. It's not planned to take it to the Office of Nuclear Regulation, the safety authorities in Britain, to do a comprehensive review for it. There is no timescale for that, because the design isn't complete enough to send it to them. You need a complete design, and Rolls-Royce is not going to do that. Next one, please. This is a very dense design, but it's taken from Rolls-Royce's evidence to a House of Lords committee, and I've reproduced it because there are some absolutely extraordinary conditions in it. Third one down, matching funding at a minimum up to the end of the licensing phase. So government is going to have to pay for the majority of the development costs. Rolls-Royce will not pay for the development costs of this design. The fifth one down, a suitable site to develop first of a kind, so that's Trosveneth, you can see. Next one down, a guaranteed UK market of 7 gigawatts electric. That's 16 reactors of the Rolls-Royce size by 2035. Rolls-Royce says their reactor will be available to order by 2028. Now, how does Rolls-Royce think a government of today can commit a government in 10 years' time to order 16 reactors? They can't possibly do that. They can't commit the next government, let alone 1, 3 or 4 governments away. So an absolutely extraordinary set of conditions. If a non-UK technology is selected, in other words, if the government has the temerity not to choose Rolls-Royce, Rolls-Royce has to be the partner. So they want a slice of the action, whoever is chosen. No government could or should agree to such conditions. Next one, please. NewScale was probably one of the first SMRs to be built, and it's very different in its conception to the Rolls-Royce one. It's a much more modern design. It's much smaller, 60 megawatts, so it's a sixth of the size of the Rolls-Royce plant. And NewScale talks very much about building it in clusters, that building in clusters of interdependent reactors on the same site, up to 12 reactors, so 720 megawatts. So you could get maybe 8 or 9 of them at the Trosveneth site. It's backed by a large engineering company, Fluor, the people that messed up the decommissioning contract in UK. But it has the good sense to set up a deal with Rolls-Royce in 2014 and Sheffield Forgemasters, I think, in 2016. So Fluor is a smart bunch, and they've got their UK partners lined up. It's the only SMR design worldwide that has come under serious comprehensive review. It was submitted to the US safety authorities in 2016. There's no end date for when that review will be completed. The likelihood is that it will pass that review. Whether it will be economic is another matter, because until a safety authority has gone through it and said what is needed to make the design licensable, you don't know what the cost is going to be. Every nuclear vendor is going to try and get away with as few safety requirements as possible, and then when the safety authority said no, you need this, then they will grudgingly add it. They're not going to add more than they think the safety authorities are going to ask for. There are no firm orders for the NewScale, but there are fairly serious expressions of interest from 3 US companies, customers, including the US government, for one set of reactors. There's some interest from Jordan. NewScale took over from Rolls-Royce in Jordan. Romania has said it would like some, and Canada has also talked about building some. Final slide then. So are SMRs a good idea? Well, it depends on the economies from large-scale component manufacture more than paying for loss of scale economies. Now, the problem with that is that you can only test it by doing it. So if you want to find out if building on production lines at 8 a year is going to bring the cost down, you've got to build on production lines at 8 a year to find that out. So it's a bit chicken and egg. You can't find out until you've actually done it. Will it actually mean that the cost overruns and the time overrun problems that other designs have had, will they be solved by building smaller? Or is the problem not that the reactors are big, but that they're complicated? And it may be that a small modular reactor is no less complicated than the large lump like the Wilfer plant, in which case you haven't solved any of the problems. As I said earlier, Rolls-Royce is asking for commitments that no government could possibly sign up to. It cannot commit itself to order 16 reactors in 10 years' time. No government can do that. Most of the SMRs are based on the idea that because they are smaller, they will need fewer safety features than the big ones. Again, that's an untested idea. For example, many of the manufacturers, developers of SMRs are saying we don't need backup generators because it's smaller. That will be for the safety authorities to decide. They're also saying that because it's small, you don't need an evacuation zone. Again, we'll have to see about that. But until these designs have been fully worked out and thoroughly assessed, then cost estimates are at best a guess. I would say my interpretation of the British government's policy at the moment is that they have realised that these are not the answer to reviving nuclear's fortunes, and they're backpedalling as gently as they can without having to admit that they actually had chosen the wrong design feature. Thank you.